What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Find out every Monday at 8 on Notes from an Artist. Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist. Revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. Every Monday at 8 on CygnusRadio.com. And check out previous episodes on our podcast. Notesfromanartist.buzzsprout.com.
Hi, this is David Gross, and along with my co-host Tom Semioli, we want to welcome you to Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Tonight, we are welcoming to our show Michael League. Michael is the driving force behind Snarky Puppy. He has also worked with David Crosby, Layla Hathaway, Joshua Redmond, Salif Keita, and numerous others. So let's begin our conversation with Michael League. Hi, Tom. Hi, Michael.
So much to discuss. You know, one of the things when I look at your career, and you are on Wikipedia, so I know all about you. You're a producer, you're a recording artist, band leader, bass player, occasionally, right? Composer. You're working with social media. You're a label owner. You're a studio owner. I guess you change the light bulbs too and clean the kitchen, right? You do it all. To me, it's kind of like, it's almost like what the template has now become for a musician in the 21st century post-COVID. And David and I were a little bit older than you.
We were doing records when I was younger. They had hamsters.
They still do. It's only now the hamsters run the digital service provider platforms. You know.
The problem was, though, back then I had to have the hamsters go backwards to reverse tape, which was really confusing. I had to put the food on the opposite side.
Right.
Right. Well, so when David and I, when the earth was still cooling, you could make a living as a bass player. You had gigs, you had, you know, you'd be in a couple of bands, you do sessions, you did demo work, which was big before Pro Tools turned your living room into Sunset Sound. And of course, there was theater work. But now it seems like to make your way in life as a musician, you really have to diversify. You have to do more than one thing.
Yeah, sure. And I think that it was pre-COVID also. You know, I mean, I'm 37, so I really kind of became a professional musician, I guess, around 2006. You know, that's when I left school and went out into the real world or whatever, you know. And yeah, definitely, even as early as then, the early 2000s, I think there was this thing of, if you want to be a successful musician, you gotta wear a lot of hats. You know, you gotta play in a lot of different styles, but you also have to understand how to promote yourself. You have to understand how to run social media. You have to understand how to do graphic design, basically, you know, all this kind of stuff, because you don't have any money, right? You know. So, you know, if you had more gigs, then you'd have the money to pay people to do those things, but less gigs. I think whenever you talk to any generation, they're always going to say it was so much better when I was young. And I don't know if that's because it's just always true that things are constantly getting worse, or if it's that people are
nostalgic for their own youth.
Maybe also inclined to see change as a threat. I can relate to that deeply, that like, I don't want to get on TikTok. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I hate the fact that I might have to get on TikTok to stay relevant. Like, you know, I hate that. Whereas an 18-year-old bass player probably looks at TikTok as an opportunity, and I look at it as like a pain in the butt. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of it has to do with perspective also. You know, so yeah, it's interesting. That's an interesting kind of rabbit hole to go down.
It's also, to me, and to the naysayers, you say older generations who pine for the earlier days. It really, right now, the artist has all the power in his or her hands. Snarky Puppy kind of caught the wave of when YouTube started to really become ubiquitous. Now, you think about it, you know, would Snarky Puppy have gotten a record deal, let's say, in the 60s or 70s or 80s, when you had to go past the test of a record company executive, where you kind of came up organically?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could say for, obviously, I can't say for certain whether we would have had an easier or more difficult path had we existed in the 60s and the 70s, but I would actually maybe contest that statement and say that I think actually we would have had a much more successful and much easier go in that decade, just because the general public was more open-eared.
That was true. That is true, yes.
Whereas we had to spend a lot of time and a lot of years beating people over the head with our music to convince them that it was worth something. And YouTube, it was absolutely Facebook. You know, these were the channels that we used to do so. But, you know, I think with any band or artist or actor or whatever that has success, there's always a combination of like super hard work and good decision making and like and like timing. Good luck and timing, you know. And for Snarky Puppy, I think all that kind of converged we were very resourceful, we were very hardworking, and we saw an opportunity in a certain moment that maybe 5 years later, I would say we wouldn't have had the opportunity. You know what I mean? When YouTube was just oversaturated with bedroom singers and stuff, you know, that I think maybe it would have been harder for us to cut through. But in that moment, we were creating a form of media that was unique on a DSP that was emerging, but also, as you said, ubiquitous. So yeah, you know, a lot of luck and a lot of work. I think you have to prepare. David Crosby always says something like, you gotta set the table so that when luck walks in, she can sit down and eat.
That was Snarky Puppy doing What About Me? We're talking with Michael League from Snarky Puppy, and this is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Last week we interviewed Ron Carter. I think out of the entire couple of hours, the key phrase for me, what I got out of it was he planned. It's not something that you just fall into. It takes setting that goal and then backward mapping from that. Okay, what do I have to do here? Now, it doesn't mean that everything you're going to do is going to work. That's to the gods, so to speak. I think the point is that you need to have a plan in place no matter what you're going to do, whether it's an actor. My wife's a filmmaker, so, you know, obviously there's got to be a script. There's got to be a storyboard before a script. There's got to be this, that, and the other thing. So consequently, it's not just musicians. It has to work pretty much for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like plan for success, but don't expect it. Like expect failure and plan for success, you know? That way your defeats aren't crushing.
Yeah, and I think fail more often and more quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And don't make the same mistake twice. You know, when you fail, learn from it. Don't do that again. Try something else and fail at something else, you know?
Exactly.
So that you reduce the number of options. But yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And Ron's a great example of that. You know, he always positioned himself in a very intelligent way. And I would like to say that, you know, Snarky Puppy has done the same, or that I try to do that, like try to think about what's the goal here, what's the objective, how do we get there? Let's map out those points, but let's also be very reactive and adaptive to any kind of forks in the road or any changes in the plan. And like, don't be married to your original idea, but just stay light on your feet and agile. And when there's an obstacle, you know, look at it as an opportunity and try to use it to your advantage. You know,
absolutely. Which segues us into your solo record. How about that? That was kind of neat.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That was a product of lockdown, right? I mean, from what I understand, you were in Spain, and at the last minute, or just before lockdown, you grabbed a suitcase and a laptop, and you went to your girlfriend in the south of Spain, and that's where the record came about. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the document where I had like all the song ideas, like lyric ideas, or song concept ideas and soundscape ideas. It's called, you know, ML Solo Album 2015. So the origin of the idea is not in COVID, but the actualization of the idea is during COVID. You know, that it's something I wanted to do for 5 years, but I just procrastinated. And then, yeah, I'm basically at my girlfriend's like shoebox apartment in Cadiz, and everything that I have for the next 2 months has been canceled, which has, you know, gone on to be significantly longer than 2 months. So I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to like do all the things that I haven't had a chance to do, which is I'm going to wake up in the morning, I'm going to practice some instruments that I want to learn, have been wanting to learn and haven't been able to practice, and then I'm going to write this record in the afternoons, you know? So I spent basically 2 months worth of afternoons and evenings actually writing the songs, because there were no songs that had been written, just ideas, you know? And then I recorded it at Fallout Home when my studio was finished.
And you did have, Nick Hard was your co-producer on this record?
Yeah. He's the engineer I work with most often, sometimes as a mix engineer, sometimes as a recording engineer, sometimes as a co-producer, sometimes as all three. And he's really just like everything you want, I think, in person that fills those roles, you know. So it was just me and him, and he played a huge role in of course, you know, achieving the desired soundscape and being the second voice, because you know, there's a big difference between doing a record alone and doing a record with two people. You know, a much bigger difference than doing the record with two people or doing a record with three people. You know what I mean? It's there, but the difference between 1 and 2 is like the Grand Canyon, you know. So it was very helpful, you know, very, very helpful.
Yeah, we had the same conversation with Larry Grenadier when he did his solo record, The Gleaners, and he was standing there in the studio and there was nobody there but him. and the engineer. So it's different than bouncing off ideas.
Nick, right. Yeah, no, sorry, there's a delay. Nick is, he knows when to interject ideas and he knows when to let the artist kind of flounder, which is important. And we've worked together. I mean, God, I think we've probably done 30 records together. And if you count all the Snarky Puppy live recordings we've probably done 130 records together. We know each other well and have a great system.
And Right Where I Fall is the first single. Quite an extraordinary video.
That was Right Where I Fall by Michael League from his new solo record. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
How does it feel to be the star of a video?
Uncomfortable to be called that. That's how it feels. Yeah, it was weird because, my idea for the music videos for this record was actually that I wanted to not appear in any of them, and I wanted to only use musicians as the actors, like musician friends of mine, but because of COVID and stuff, it became more difficult for people to travel and do things like that, and also money became a difficult thing. So actually it's really funny, like I live in Catalonia, northeastern Spain, and the film crew is all Catalan for all three music videos that we're making, and all the actors in that video, it's just me, but their videos there's actors, and they're all from the village, from this little 400-person village where I live. So it's all everything's shot in the village, so it's really cute because it's kind of like a community kind of hang, which is really, really nice,
And are the videos going to come out, I guess, concurrently until the 25th, or?
Yeah, there's a new one coming out this Friday, and then we're shooting the next one in like a week and a half.
I like your concept of wanting musicians to be in your videos. Another funny thing with Ron, he was saying, do you ever notice how years ago when they had musicians playing instruments in commercials, they were actually musicians, so they actually could handle the instruments in the right way. And nowadays you have actors doing the instrumental parts. They go, no, you would never play that this way. You'd never do this.
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of kills the realism in a certain way, yeah. I think the greatest cop shows, like a cop would watch that and like it, I think probably The Godfather is like a popular film in the Italian-American. I think it's one of those things that we shouldn't set our standards for anything. I mean, I know you weren't going in this direction with your statement, but like, I'm going to just take it there that like, we shouldn't ever set our standards based on what most people will get. You know what I mean? Like, unless you're in advertising, but like as artists, if you're a filmmaker, you should cast a person that really understands how to use that instrument and can also act. Plenty of people that can do that in this world. You know what I mean? And I feel the same about pretty much, also about songwriting or production. It's like when I'm producing something, what am I thinking about? Am I thinking about how 60% of the population will understand this? Or am I thinking about this is exactly what I want to do in the best possible way I can do it, and if people like it, great, It's a question we have to ask ourselves a lot, I think, as musicians,
That was Snarky Puppy featuring Layla Hathaway doing a tune called Something. We're talking with Michael League, and this is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
As far as videos, David, I would take one exception with Robert Palmer's Discipline of Love. Or not Discipline,
Addicted to Love.
Addicted to Love, okay, yeah.
Those girls could play.
Yeah. There you go, Michael. There's a video, maybe fourth video if you want to do...
That video is so intentionally stylized in that way.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That it's great. It's not pretending to be something that it isn't. It's like,
right.
Yeah, obviously these are, actresses that are, you were not even trying to create the illusion that they're playing these instruments. Like the whole idea is that they're just holding them and messing around. But yeah, it does bother me when I see a film that's like a serious film about music and then the bass player like is holding the bass the wrong way. It's like, really?
Yeah.
It's like playtime. It's not, a serious thing. I think that in general, doing the music video thing is a really interesting format that I love. It's like making mini movies. It's almost in a way kind of like making mini silent films. Even though obviously they're not silent because you don't have dialogue, you have to tell the story through imagery
right.
and action, and I love that forum, that context for visual art and filmmaking, and like I'm like addicted to it. I want to do one for every song that I ever do for the rest of my life now, just because personally I have a strong relationship between imagery and sound. I'm actually more a visual, it's funny as a musician to say this, but I'm a more visual learner than I am an auditory learner.
So when somebody tells you something, do you go, I see what you mean, or do I hear you?
I think I say I see what you mean.
That's the point.
I think I do, yeah. But I definitely do try to see things. And like if you teach me a rhythm right now, the way that I'm going to remember the rhythm is not remembering the way that you sang it. It's going to be remembering the image I saw in my head when you sang it.
Yeah. And I love your point about silent film as well. It's a wonderful medium. I remember back in the mid 80s, I would put bands together at the Knitting Factory and show them a silent film for the first time. And they'd all interact and create an improv based on what they saw. That was actually very, very popular back. You're creating your dialogue with your instrument. It was a very cool concept.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's so many different ways of doing it, and there's so many great music videos. I mean, you can look at something like Michael Jackson's Thriller, and then you can look at something like Radiohead, the song Just. You could look at something like Bjork, like any one of the Michel Gondry videos that were done for Bjork, and it's like, those are like three completely different ways of creating art in that medium. One is like big kind of song and dance production. One is like a mini film, a mini drama. And one is like just complete abstract, beautiful imagery, you know, and that's deep. That's like really, I love it. I want to make a million more, you know, I love it.
Well, it's also interesting that you come of a generation where you never knew a world that didn't exist without music videos, right, David? Because when David and I remember when MTV first started, and musicians were kind of stumbling around. Now, all of a sudden, they had to present themselves visually. And if you go in the archives, it's fun to watch a lot of the early MTV videos because they were actually shot on videotape. No one envisioned YouTube that this stuff would be around 40 years later. It was just of the moment. Sure. And the thing is now you're making this video. Back in the MTV days, it aired for a couple of weeks and then it disappeared into the atmosphere. Maybe if you had one of those old clunky, remember, David, the VHS recorders, you could capture it, but for you know, but it disappeared. Whereas now you take Right Where I Fall and in 20 years, somebody will be watching that video.
But remember, Tom, the Beatles started doing videos in the 60s. Yeah. Magical Mystery Tour was really a long-form video.
Yeah, more abstract, right? Than like Help.
But it's just the fact that we can access these things now. These videos exist in perpetuity, whereas it's interesting in that sense. Those videos were just meant for the moment. They showed on television, and then they went away. People didn't have YouTube or recording devices.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's something that everybody is very conscious of right now. I wouldn't even say just in my generation, but just in the world today. Yeah. People are very conscious of the immortality of artistic product. Now we've accepted this idea that there is an infinitely large or almost infinitely large space to archive everything, and that we have to be a lot more careful what we say and what we do, and hear all these stories about Led Zeppelin or like these bands in the 60s and 70s, and you're like, things could never happen now, and often for the better, that these things will never happen again, you know? I definitely think that in today's world, you know, people are more conscious of the long-term effects of their actions and also their art. So for me, I always kind of think I've converted to thinking that way now, just like, I don't want to create something that I'm going to be ashamed of in 20 years, even if it made me a lot of money.
Live Jam with Joshua Redman, Lionel Luque, Larnell Lewis, and Michael League at the Park Stage, 2018. We are in conversation with Michael League, and this is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. I'll tell you an interesting story. Old friend of mine is a drummer named Alan Childs. Alan was on Bowie tours. And I remember one night he flew in, the next morning went up and did a wedding. Even at that level.
Wow.
Yeah. You're still. And you know what I liken it to? I know this sounds funny. I call it the Chris Walken disease. Christopher Walken has made a lot of shitty movies, right? The guy's a phenomenal dancer. The guy's comic brilliance, great timing, but he needed to work. And I think that is a big point. He would work. I bump into him on the subway. For Christ's sake, I bumped into Nick Ashford on a subway going downtown. I would like to get into your views on college music education. Back in my day, there were really three schools. There was North Texas, where you went. There was Berkeley, and brand new, the Walt Disney School, which was California Institute of the Arts. It was just getting started. Those were basically my three possibilities. And maybe Miami, right? Right, Tom? Maybe Miami?
I am a University of Miami music minor. I did not waste all my parents' money, just a little bit of it. Yes, Michael, it was all about diversification because in those days we had what was known as top 40 bands, which meant you'd play a dinner set, you'd play a dance set, you'd play an after hours set. And it was everything from Donna Summer to whatever, Lionel Richie and things like that.
My way.
Yeah. So I think music school, it gave you the theoretical foundation, of course, the sight reading and all that. It gave you the tools to grow. It can hold you back in the same way.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Tom, I think you said the key word, which is tools. I think that's what music school is about in a lot of ways. But it can be about a lot of things. It can be about exposure to new people and new ideas. It can be about building a foundation for your future music community, because I find that I still make a lot of music with people that went to my school, that network, that North Texas network is very wide. And it's
absolutely
almost like being in a fraternity in a certain kind of way, that when you meet someone that also went to UNT, you share a common experience, even if they went 20 years before or after you. There's a lot of beautiful things that music school has to offer. And I think the most important thing for a student to be aware of is exactly what you want to get out of the school, number one, and number two, exactly what you physically cannot get out of the school. And not to confuse either of those things, especially the second one, that you don't learn what music is or what it's about in school. You gather skills and tools that will allow you to process and engage with music throughout your life. And for me, I was so fundamentally deficient on like a technical level when I went to school. I didn't know how to read. I wasn't a great improviser. I couldn't walk a bass line very well. I didn't have a good sound. So school for me was like boot camp, and it was amazing. It was exactly what I needed. But there were other musicians that were coming into school at my age that already had all their technical stuff together, and they didn't have so much of a benefit from school. Like for me, maybe the better thing, had I been one of those musicians, the better thing would have been to just move to New Orleans or move to New York and just put myself in a music scene, understand really what music is, why human beings make it, what role it serves in society, and what role it serves on an individual and emotional level. And engage with music in that kind of more spiritual and social and human way than an analytical way. So I this semester, because of COVID, I was teaching at a conservatory in Barcelona. I was just trying to hammer into my students, you don't learn music here. This is not what you do. You're building muscles. You're in the weight room right now building muscles. The stadium that you're going to play in is not in here. And not just in a professional context of where you're going to play, but what music is in its essence. You're going to learn more about that going to a tiny village in the southeast of Turkey than you're going to learn inside the walls of Juilliard. You know what I mean? About why. What is music? Why does it exist? Why are we pursuing it? Why does it move us? And for me, that's the answer to that is it's just always in the street. It's always in clubs. It's in scenes. It's in communities. And a school is a certain kind of community. But it's the reason why it exists is because there's people there that lack stuff. The common thing about every student is that there's a deficiency they need to correct, right? For me, it was a technical, but also a theoretical deficiency. And so we're all there to learn. For me, that's a different sense of community than a flamenco, a gypsy flamenco community in Jerez or something in the south of Spain, or a community of Ganawa musicians in Soweto, Morocco, or something, So for me, I think it's just very important that a student understands, why am I here at school?
Right.
What is my objective? What am I trying to get? And more importantly, to view school as a supplemental source of inspiration and information, not as the sole source that's required to become a great musician. If you think that because you got your degree that all of a sudden you're a great musician and you deserve gigs and you're professional and you have something to say, I would say you might be mistaken. It's possible that you are, but it's not because of the sheet of paper. So that's in a very, very large nutshell, those are my feelings on music education,
I like it. As an addendum, that sheet of paper only means you are now unemployed.
Art Blakey spoke at one of my forums and said, you'll learn about music and life when you get out of school. You're learning the basics, the structure, and now go out and understand what music really is.
And I took great benefit from school. Like I said, it did so many good things for me. It got my technique stuff together, broadened my listening, because there were people listening to stuff that I had never heard before, and we were always sharing music with each other. Put me in the middle of a community that was competitive and inspiring, which it didn't have when I was in a small suburb of Northern Virginia, of DC in Northern Virginia. And also it built my network that I formed my band within. You know, and
most important thing,
and continue to. Yeah, so I mean, there was a lot of benefit. I learned what music was when I left school and became a part of the Dallas music scene: gospel, R&B, soul, hip hop. Like, once I switched my scene from playing steakhouse trio gigs with college jazz musicians to, like, playing with Erykah Badu's backing band every Wednesday, doing like contemporary R&B covers and improvising grooves and chord progressions behind singers, and playing in churches where there's no sheet music and where they tell you to learn 5 songs for Sunday, and you show up and they play a different set of songs that you've never heard before, but you still have to play them. Like, this is where I learned about music. You know what I mean? I didn't learn about it in school, you know? Really about music, you know?
Right.
But I was able to engage in those situations in a more informed and expedited way based on the skills and the knowledge that I had accumulated in my studies at North Texas. So, you know, that's why I say it's supplemental. You can't think of it as like, because I went to music school, I get it.
You said at the beginning that, you're not practicing to learn some new instruments. Which ones?
Yeah, well, there's actually quite a... probably more than there should be, because it just ensures that I'm not going to do any of them very well. But primarily this instrument, which is like the ancient ancestor of the bass, it's called a gimbri or a sintir.
Wow.
It's like a Moroccan, North African three-stringed instrument. I don't know if you can hear that. Which is really interesting. Technique's also really interesting. You play with a big nail on your first finger. Play drums. You play drums while you... which is kind of a really cool... For me, it's like by far the most interesting bass instrument that I've ever heard.
That is a fabulous
instrument. The way that it makes you feel. Yeah, and it's like 1,000 or 2,000 years old. Nobody really knows. But
well, you talk about a vintage 59 Fender, and that's 2,000-year-old.
Well, this instrument is not 2,000 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody knows.
That was Michael League off his new record, So Many Me, and the tune was In Your Mouth. This is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Any other thing?
Yeah, so there's that. Yeah. I mean, basically, most of the instruments that I'm studying come from Morocco and Turkey. So there's that. There's this, which is like Bandleader, which is like a very typical instrument in the Arab world, which is, you know.
Like it's got a snare in it.
Yeah, there's these little strings on the inside like a snare drum, you know.
Wow.
And you can like remove them, so you have this sound, which is like the buzzy sound, you know. Or you can take them, loosen them up, and then you get the tone of the drum. So it's really different. You just pull the string and change the sound. So there's a lot of hand drumming stuff. This other drum from Turkey called daf, which is like a frame drum with rings. Mm-hmm. And then one of the drums that I've been practicing most is this drum called dohola, which is like a darbuka, like a goblet-shaped drum, but it's ceramic with a goatskin head. And then like these things that are also from Morocco, they're like Moroccan metal castanets. They're called crackabs, and they're fucking loud, so I'm gonna play them over here. But like, and then oud, oud, of course, and like now I'm starting to get into balama, which is like saz, which is like another double stringed instrument, mostly found in Turkey. And so yeah, I'm definitely like going down the percussion hole in a big way. That's like a dangerous zone, but also like generally sticking to like percussion instruments and stringed instruments. I'm not like messing around with woodwinds or anything like that. It's like another world, a little scary for me. So
are you familiar with the musicians of Jajuka?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
All right.
The master musicians of Jajuka.
Yeah, there's a really old album. Brian Jones went to Morocco. he did that in like 1969. And then, of course, Ornette was working with them. I think it was on Virgin something, one of Ornette's records. And oddly enough, it was the Jujuka musicians and Jerry Garcia, for all things, on the same album.
Yeah, I think the Rolling Stones or Mick Jagger did something with them. Or I mean, generally
they did recently. Actually, I know Brian Jones did the first one, and I think the Stones in the late '80s actually had them come back and do a track on one of their latter day records. Yeah,
did something as well. Yeah,
definitely.
Stuff.
Yeah,
Good
exactly.
Stuff.
Yeah, he did. I mean, Morocco is a. I think a lot of American musicians are attracted to Morocco because there's a relationship there. I think in terms of like the blues, and also the idea that if you think about when we talk about modern American music, we're generally like 98% of it is Black American music. Right. That has its roots in a community that was enslaved, and it's similar in Morocco and Algeria. The Ganawa people.
Right.
They were brought from West Africa north by the Arab slave traders. Predating Christian Western European slavery, so they were brought to the north, and so you have this group of oppressed people that are figuring out how to make instruments that sound like the instruments that they used to play in their homeland, and also similar feelings of like seeking joy in a super jacked up situation. And so I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think that's why jazz musicians, like, why do they always go to Morocco, and like why don't they go to Namibia, I mean, or why do they not go to Japan? And I think because there's a similar narrative there, and the music carries a similar sentiment. And like, who was it? Ali, I think it was Ali Farka Touré who said, like, the blues, we've been playing that shit for 1,000 years. He's from Mali. He was from Mali, so it's like that's not new. Like, we've been playing that for 1,000 years, so can't remember the quote. You have to find the exact quote, but something to that effect, that it's like, there's the root of what Americans do musically is undeniably there. In specifically kind of West Africa, and it's really fascinating.
That was the master musicians of Jujuka from an album that came out in 1968 when Brian Jones went to Morocco. We are talking with Michael League, and this is Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com.
I love that kind of diving down that hole and like checking out similarities between stuff and just learning about it. Because whether you realize it or not, whether you're ignorant to it or not, like, you're a part as a musician, and especially as an American musician, you're a part of this very, very long heritage of music, very long line of music. And the more you know, the less likely you are to confuse something you're doing as new when it's probably not.
When you start really getting into it, there's a lot of other stuff going on. And there was one great thing about the internet. That's it. The ability to research and to find things that you may not have found before.
Just because there's so much information and so much history in the world, easy to oversimplify things. Oh yeah, harmony. That's like, let's talk about American music. Okay, it's African rhythms and Western European harmony. No, it's not. It's like, oh, what? There was no harmony in Africa? Like a continent that's like, how many times bigger than the United States? It's like, come on. Like, it's just oversimplifications that finally, I think, is starting to kind of get unpacked in terms of like general visibility. That it's like there's always been people who knew about it because it's the truth. But like, right. I think only in the last couple of years has there been like a real surge in visibility and to be honest, like an emphasis on the importance of learning about why things are the way they are. And why is it that I learned so much about this one very small part of the world, and yet I know nothing about this like gigantic part of the world, whether that be like Asia, which is like, how big is Asia, or Africa, or whatever. And so I don't know, I guess that's a whole another tangent, but just thinking about the way that we're educated, the way that we're taught. And, even just using the term classical music, like what, Indians don't have classical music? Why? Like, oh, we mean Western European classical music. And I think that's there's a lot of power in vocabulary, and I'm probably as guilty as anybody else in perpetuating a lot of those things because I'm ignorant to them. But, I think every day, hopefully the world gets a little less ignorant about those narratives that we continue to push and perpetuate. And I'm glad that stuff is becoming more visible, and that, especially in the music community, that it's being talked about more. And
post-COVID, it's, think of the effect on the music industry now. We've lost a lot of venues. However, there's this new hybrid Zoom medium now where we're seeing concerts on Zoom. And obviously, as we progress, Zoom and Zoom technology will get more sophisticated to where you can hear a Zoom concert in high fidelity. I have yet to have the experience. I'm playing a gig tomorrow up in Woodstock, but the idea, I've been talking to guys, some of my colleagues, and the adapting to the fact that you're playing live, but the audience isn't in front of you, they're on a screen. So I think, with Zoom technology becoming more sophisticated, that is another avenue for musicians to express themselves in a live format. I was talking with Ron McClure, my old teacher, recently, and Ron, who's a jazz player and also an educator, doing more and more house concerts, and especially, things like that. So I think in the post-COVID world, we're going to have to diversify even more in terms of live music. But I think Zoom technology does offer yet another platform for us.
Yeah, I think it's just natural, Pro Tools, Zoom, it's like things have to grow and evolve. And, I think especially when you have like a global event, whether it's a war, pandemic, when the whole world is kind of being affected by the same thing, that's generally when inventions emerge. Historically, that's like when. So I think that there's going to be quite a lot of innovation that has occurred during and due to COVID that will then remain. I had a really interesting email from my production manager, Rosanna Friedman, in the UK, and she was saying, hey, I just got this email from a friend of mine who's disabled, and it was an email basically saying like, hey, when the world goes back to normal, please don't cut off this streaming, because this is actually the first time in our lives that we as disabled people have felt like we've had an equal amount of access to art as non-disabled people. If you don't have the ability to use your legs, your experience is not being affected watching a concert on Zoom. There's no difference in your experience versus a person who can use their legs, which I found to be really fascinating. I had never thought about that, and it was definitely like cool that was voiced and that got on our radar. And so we're going to absolutely every venue that we play that has the ability to stream, we're going to absolutely stream the concerts. And I think a lot of venues are going to be being like, well, just because we can have live gigs again doesn't mean that we have to cut off this other revenue stream. Like, let's keep it rolling, So right. I think that maybe we might be entering into a new, kind of a brave new world of digital consumption, even though, of course, everyone is craving being presential again. I think it's valid and fascinating, and there's people creating like crazy immersive virtual reality experiences with avatars where you can like take a selfie with a musician, and then talk to them. You're like talking from Japan to Mexico, but actually in the virtual space you're standing next to each other and taking a photo together, shaking hands. And I mean, some really crazy shit is going to happen, I think, in the next 20 years. And I think that this is just kind of fast tracking it.
Goes back to the punk era. So right before the punk, you had this heavily bloviated rock music. All these progressive and
smoke machines.
Exactly. Then the punks, oh man, this can't happen again. And then they did their thing. Then all of a sudden we had the 80s. I still have some of my spandex, thank you very much. Then came grunge. Now we're the Zoom / Pro Tools. 2 or 3 years from now, it's going to go back the other way again. Mark my words. Somebody's going to come up with the idea,
definitely.
Malcolm McLaren or not, and go, hey, let's do this.
With Ground Up Record, your record label, I mean, I think that's, having a hybrid Zoom Live platform is a tremendous tool. I mean, I have no problem on a high-def computer, paying $10 to see Snarky Puppy in Japan because I can't get to Japan and they may not be coming to my town. So, again, yes, a revenue sharing thing, a great way to promote your record, obviously, is by doing live and studio performances and streaming. So I think, I think it's a great new platform. And as you say, as technology becomes more sophisticated and you can do things with avatars and virtual reality, it will be a medium unto itself.
Yeah, I agree.
That was a live show at the North Beach Band Show in 2017 featuring Terrence Blanchard, Esperanza Spalding, Jamison Ross, Bob Lanzetti, Bill Lawrence, and of course, Michael League on bass. This is Notes from an Artist, and this is CygnusRadio.com.
Let's talk bass for a second. Your beloved 59 Fender P bass. What made you why the P bass, the ye old P bass?
Why that one specifically, or why do I play a P bass in general?
Yeah, what is it about the P bass that attracted you? I mean, it's to me, the split coil that's the greatest tone a bass can achieve. I know, David, you may disagree.
No. If I was going to play 4-string bass, I would definitely. Well, when I was in Humble Pie, I had to play a 4-string P bass. So.
4-string bass.
I had Ken Smith,
okay.
a 4-string Ken Smith, when I was in college, and Snarky Puppy was opening for a band called Rudder with the great bassist Tim LaFave, who had, he has a lot of basses, but in that moment he was largely playing a P bass with flats, with like action that was like the Alps. It's like super. You could fit your whole hand between the fingerboard and the strings. We were playing a gig, and at sound check, my battery died because I had an active bass, so I was screwed. And we're in the middle of sound check, and he was like, "Hey man, just play my P bass if you want, to get through the sound check." So I started playing, and it was really hard to play. I mean, it was difficult to play, so I could only play about a third of the notes that I normally would have been playing on my Ken Smith. And I noticed how much better the band sounded when I did that. And the whole band was kind of looking at me like, "Hey man, sounds pretty good, And so then I did the gig on his bass. This was in Dallas, and it was the best the band had ever sounded,
Wow.
Just because I was playing less bullshit, really, for lack of a better term, and I was playing with a really nice, round, beefy, percussive tone. And it fit the band, I mean, Ken Smiths have their place, They sound beautiful, and they definitely have their place. But my band is not the place for that instrument, or at least the way that I play, So then I was like, all right, the first time I can find a P bass that I can afford, I'm going to buy it. And we were on tour in South Carolina, and we went into a pawn shop to buy something for the drummer. And there was a 76 maple natural finish P bass that was beat up, and they were selling it for $900. And I talked the guy down to $650 or $7 or something, and I bought the bass. And I never really looked back. I mean, I have other beautiful basses. I love, depending on the sound required. I think it's very important to have different tone options. But I would say that my go-to instrument generally is the P bass, just because it's the way that I hear bass in my head. That is the sound of bass in my head. It's versatile, it's supportive, it's beefy. There's no one that doesn't like the sound of a P bass in this world. I think it's the Converse All-Star of bass instruments. You can wear it with a suit. You can wear them in shorts. You can play basketball in them. You know what I mean? It's like it's just the ultimate, the Swiss Army knife of bass instruments.
All right, agreed.
You still using SVTs?
For me, a vintage SVT is the greatest live amp ever. 810, boom, like all day, perfect. But I've been with Mark Bass for a long time. Maybe a decade now. And of all the amps that have been made in the last 40 years, for me, my favorite sound are the more vintage sounding Mark basses. And I don't say that just because I'm with them. I'm with them because I would say that. You know what I mean? Yeah. That we designed one actually that's called the Casa. That's solid state actually. But for me, it's I have to like it because it's my signature amp. I wouldn't have allowed my name to be associated with it if I didn't like it. But it's incredible to me. It's like it's the closest thing that I've heard to the sound that I hear in my head as a bass player that I found, other than like a 60s or 70s SVT, But if I had to choose between like an SVT now, like a modern SVT, and the Casa, there'd be no question that I'd go with the Casa. It's awesome. Sounds awesome. And also, the difference maybe too is that because it's a modern amplifier, it can handle my Mini Moog Model D. It can handle crazy sub-octave effects, but also can sound super bumpy and old school, which I love. Which, if you run a Model D through an SVT, it sounds amazing, but you're going to be missing out on a lot of the stuff that you wouldn't be missing out on if you did it through a modern amp. So, So I mean, I really love the Mark Bass stuff. When I'm recording, normally I use that, an Ampeg B15. Vintage B15, but once again, it just depends on what's needed in the recording. If it needs to feel like super rich and beefy, then I use a Mark Bass. But if I want it to sound old school and thumpy, then I use that.
Now, post-COVID, what's new for Michael Lee? What's going to be happening? Let's say over the next 6 to 10 months.
Well, this year I'm producing I set a goal of basically producing a record a month. So to do 12 records this month as a producer. So I've already done we're in May, right? So I finished 4, and number 5 is next week, and number 6 is the week after. And just like trying to work with artists from around the world, from different places. My solo album was the first of the 12.
Right.
But working with people like Antonio Sanchez, Pedrito Martinez, Fari Joshua Venugopal from India, Malam Hamad Al-Kasra from Morocco. Did a duo record with Bill Lawrence. Produced a record for the Ataka Quartet, a classical quartet that won the Grammy last year for Best Chamber Music Ensemble Recording. But this record was all interpreting the music of electronic music composers, which is very interesting. So we had collaborations with Square Pusher and Daedalus and people like that, which was super cool, covering stuff by Flying Lotus and Lewis Cole. Doing a record with a Kurdish ensemble, recording Kurdish wedding songs for the first time in history, like professionally, other than like songs that are only right now preserved in wax cylinders from like the early 1900s.
Fabulous.
And we're going to professionally record them for the first time, which is super interesting. I'm really excited about a flamenco recording I'm going to do with Jorge Pardo, who was Paco de Lucia's flute player, Danny Casares, flamenco guitar player, another project with Gregoire Marais, the great chromatic harmonica player, and Jorge Glem, C4 trio from Venezuela. So like really stuff from all over the world. I'm trying to spread out and grow, you know.
Sounds fabulous. Hey, is Gary Willis near you? Because I know he's living in Spain.
Yeah, we talk a lot. He lives like 45 minutes from me.
Oh, how's he doing?
Yeah, we teach at the same school. He's great, man.
Good.
Super. He's riding his bike every day. He's like, Iron Man now. He's like awesome. And just the coolest dude and best teacher. We teach at the same school.
Okay.
We both teach at Berkeley, Valencia. And he's incredible. What a guy. What a dude.
Well, when you see him, send him my regards, please.
I will. I absolutely will, yeah. We were supposed to go bike riding soon. He's going to destroy me, but...
All right. Great conversation, Michael. Good to see you.
You too. Thanks for having me. Hope something in there is cohesive and thanks,
great
guys.
stuff.
Appreciate
and
it
hope
very
to
much.
see you. Hope to see you in person soon on the bandstand.
I hope to see me on the bandstand soon too. It's weird. It's been way too long. No, I appreciate that, and hopefully all this stuff will start getting back to normal soon. Thanks, guys.
All right, bye-bye. Take care.
That's our show for tonight. I want to thank my co-host, Tom Semioli, and of course, Michael League for a great interview and some really great music. I also want to let you know that we have begun to archive our previous shows via our podcast, also titled Notes from an Artist. You can find all of them with any of the major podcast players or at our website, notesfromanartist.buzzsprout.com. Next week, we'll be on the air with our special guest, the great Dave Swift. So tune in Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern for the next edition of Notes from an Artist on CygnusRadio.com. Have a great week, folks. Thanks for listening.